This is the first in a series of videos where I show images and video footage taken during 2 recent trips to North Norfolk. North Norfolk is one of the best areas in the UK for birds and wildlife, and as a nature photographer it's an area I never tire of visiting. During my first trip I had arranged to spend the first 2 days of it with well-known nature photographer David Tipling. Living in Norfolk, David knows the area like the back of his hand, and having someone with local knowledge is invaluable when you're going to an area you are not familiar with. The main subjects I wanted to photograph was hares and barn owls, so this is where David's local knowledge of the area would be invaluable. Unfortunately, during the 2 days that I spent with David, I had dull weather, heavy winds and almost continuous rain. This meant that opportunities to photograph barn owls in flight would be very limited. The 2 things barn owls do not like are windy conditions and heavy rain. This is because if their feathers get wet, they are unable to fly and hunt. So initially the conditions were against me for getting any decent barn owl shots. Fortunately, the rain didn't bother the hares that much, although they were not as active as I'd hoped. Although we did see some hares boxing in the distance, they were too far away to be able to get a good photograph. For the hares, I would be photographing from David's car, using it as a mobile hide. David has a large 4x4 and this allowed him to get his car into areas where my Honda would have just got bogged down in the mud. The first morning we did manage to find plenty of hares to photograph, although a lot of the time they tended to be hunkered down, which made them difficult to spot. They can look quite effective when it's been raining, especially when they eventually get up and shake the water off. Hares do not live in burrows like rabbits, but will lay down in small depressions that they make in the ground. These are called forms, and when hunkered down low, they use their natural camouflage to blend in with the surroundings. This can make them quite difficult to spot. You only really notice them when they get up and move around. This hare sat motionless out in the middle of the field in the pouring rain. Because it sat there perfectly still, it did give me the opportunity to shoot some slow motion footage which showed the rain hammering down. For this I was resting the 150 to 400mm on a beanbag on the side of the car door. After a while, David suggested going and spending a couple of hours in his woodland hide. At least there we'd be out of the wind and the rain. Also, photographing birds whilst it's raining can lead to some very effective images. When photographing at David's hide, you photograph through 2-way glass. The quality of the glass is excellent, with no degradation of images, although you do lose a stop of light. The big advantage of the 2-way glass is that you can see the birds easily without the birds seeing you inside the hide. Another advantage of photographing at David's woodland hide is that you will sometimes put out a roadkill wood pigeon to attract sparrowhawks. Because of this, you stand a good chance of getting some good sparrowhawk footage. Because the light was poor, I had to set the ISO to 4000, 5000 and even on occasions 6400. However, once the images have been put through topaz denoise on the computer, it's amazing how any digital noise magically disappears. Although David had lots of different birds coming into his woodland feeding station, I was amazed at how many jays were coming in. David said he regularly gets 6 or 7 at a time. I like this slow motion footage of the jay up on this branch. When shooting video, you do not need the fast shutter speed necessary for shooting still images. Consequently, you can get some very nice video footage in conditions when the light is dull and overcast. Certainly shooting slow motion footage of birds in the rain can look very effective. On the second day we again set out to photograph hares. For part of the day the rain eased off and even stopped for short periods. Often, when spotting a hare which is some distance away, it was a case of just sitting in the car and waiting, in the hope that it will come closer. This hare, when we first saw it, was some distance away, but after waiting for about 10 minutes, it eventually started to move towards us. It then sat down and watched us, so that enabled me to get some nice portrait shots as it started to feed on the grass and vegetation. David also took me to a location that he knows is good for grey partridge. Although we get the more common red-legged partridge where I live, grey partridge in Essex are very rare, so it's not a bird I get the opportunity to photograph locally. It was brilliant to be able to get some images of grey partridge, although they were some distance away. Once again, these are photographed from the car. The grey partridge is our native partridge. The more common red-legged partridge was introduced from France in the 17th century. Although the native grey partridge is not as colourful as the red-legged, I think the grey is a much more attractive bird. The forecast for the third and last day of my Norfolk trip was a lot better. As I was only spending 2 days with David, for the last day of the trip I was by myself. Because barn owls had been unable to feed for the last couple of days because of the rain, David told me that there would be a good chance they would be out hunting early morning. He told me of a location where he'd previously photographed barn owls before, so the next morning I was up before dawn to get to the location early. Please do not ask me in the comments for this location. If you want to know where it is, you will have to book a session with David. There is a link to his website in the description. On arrival, the sun had not yet come up and the meadow was in shade and coasted in mist. As soon as I got out of the car, I saw a barn owl flying in the distance. Using the OM1 and the 150-400 with the 125 extender, I managed to get a few shots, but because the light was so poor, I had to rank up the ISO to a much higher setting than I would have liked. It then went quiet for a while, but after about 20 minutes, the barn owl flew back. By this time, the sun had just risen above the tree line, so the light was a lot better. The owl continued to hunt over the field, so I obtained some shots in better lighting, although it was still quite a distance away, so these are once again quite heavy crops. It then landed on a distant post, and I set the camera up with Pro Capture in the hope of getting shots as it took flight. This only works if the bird flies towards me or parallel to left or right. Unfortunately, on this occasion it flew away from me, which is not what I wanted. To finish off the trip, I popped in at Sculthorpe Moor Nature Reserve on the way home. David had told me that bullfinches are very easy to photograph from the Dragonfly Hide, which is quite near the centre entrance. As soon as I got in the hide, put the camera on the beanbag, a male bullfinch came onto the tree to the left-hand side of the feeders. Both male and female bullfinch were regularly coming into the feeders, so that allowed me to get some very nice portrait shots. In the next video in this series, I will show images and footage taken on my most recent trip to Norfolk, while attending a bird photography workshop. People that know me may be surprised that I had attended a workshop, but there are numerous advantages to doing so, and I'll explain why in the next video. Thanks for watching.